So I'm Erin, and I'm a little nervous. Although Bedford has taught me many things, speech giving was not one of them, so please bear with me. Okay, so the first thing I thought about when I sat down to write this speech last weekend was Miss Day's English class. She always told us to start off a good research paper. You always start with a quote, and since I don't write speeches, I decided to start off like a research paper. So I'm starting with a quote. Sir Winston Churchill, former Prime Minister of England and a known struggler of learning disabilities, once said, "Success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm." For most students with learning disabilities, that type of struggle, that type of success is a daily struggle. Enthusiasm towards school, enthusiasm towards reading, enthusiasm towards anything at all is tough when each failure makes you feel stupid and belittled and, in many cases, ignored by ignorant teachers. When I was in third grade, by the time I was in third grade, my parents had long ago recognized my dyslexia. I had a tutor at school who took me out of class every other day, and slowly she taught me the alphabet, even more slowly how to read. She used primer books that were color-coded along the binding, and after I read through 20 or so little stories, I moved on to the next color. They were typically one-liner stories with big pictures in the middle to go along with the captions, and I breezed right through them. I really loved reading these books. I thrived more off the challenge of moving on to the next level than I did of understanding the books, though. And when I reached the blue-green stripe collection, which had 2 lines of text and the pictures didn't exactly go with the words, I was struggling through it, and I hated it. I couldn't do it. I just decided to give up. Eventually, I shoved it in my desk, and I told myself to forget it. At the school I was attending at the time, grades 1 through 5 were all in the same classroom. As I was putting the primer book away, a first grader walked up to me and said, "Hey, I read that book. I read that book a long time ago. My group is already starting the pink-orange group. Why aren't you?" And he proceeded over to the cabinet and showed me his little book, which was several stages higher than mine. And this was the first memory I ever have of being ashamed of my dyslexia. It was the first time I looked at myself as a failure. Not explicitly in those words, but the pain I felt was frustration, a desire to give up, which of course I did, and hatred with ever wanting to try again. It was also the first time I stopped trying in school, because it was easier to give up than struggle and feel the frustration of not understanding. If I didn't comprehend something math, I faked the work putting down random numbers. My ability to calculate where 2 trains will pass each other if train A leaves the station at 5:30 and train B leaves the station at 2:30, 5 miles away from the first station, will forever be impaired. And it seems stupid, but this strategy of just faking work also hurt my spelling and mental math and subjects that seem elementary but are big black holes still today in my memory. By the time my parents had discovered the Bedford school, I was in 5th grade, and I trained myself to shove aside what I didn't know and played up as if I did. Whether it fooled anyone, I don't know, but I was convinced my family was merely visiting Bedford for my sister's benefit. I was going to go to public school. It was what I believed, and it was what my mother believed until she talked to Dr. Box. But as most in this room know, Bedford has a way of pulling you in with its family atmosphere and genuine concern for its students. What grabbed me, though, as a student was how safe I felt walking through its halls. And the feeling of safety didn't come from the small environment or the equalizing uniforms. It came with the realization that every kid in all my classes were confused by fractions, and we all hated reading, and none of us were going to be embarrassed by our teachers when we got the answer wrong. What made Bedford safe was the unspoken but always known factor that we all had learning disabilities. It was no longer swept under the rug or murmured to a teacher to explain why I couldn't read the following paragraph. No one had to say anything for once. For once, we all understood. But I didn't figure this out all in one day. On my first day of school in Miss Heinen's English class, we were reading passages out of workbooks, and I can only imagine what I looked like waiting for my turn to come around. Previously to Bedford, without having to say, I was the worst reader in probably the entire elementary school if a first grader was reading faster than I was. So as it got closer and closer to my turn, my heart was beating, I was probably sweating a little, and I started practicing the paragraph over in my head. If I'd only put as much energy into listening to the other kids in the class as I did into panicking, I would have noticed how everyone was fumbling over the words as much as I was. I probably would have even noticed some kids were struggling more than I was. But this all took time. Gradually, I started noticing how the other kids struggled just as much as me, and sometimes even more. Eventually, I became the person raising my hand to read rather than cowering behind the book, hoping no one would notice me. But what people have to recognize about my situation is that I don't only have dyslexia. What people have to recognize about my situation is that my dyslexia is nowhere near as severe as many of the kids that attend Bedford. I don't have dyslexia and then the extra struggle of ADD and ADHD. I wasn't severely stigmatized by my experiences in other schools, and I have an extremely high ability to shrug off comments and actions that tended to offend, which probably got me through most of my childhood. I used to be really bad at reading, but as I hope you have noticed, I'm better at it. I used to be really bad at reading, but I am still slow to grasp concepts and remember them for long periods of time. Once I have it memorized, though, I most likely will never forget it. What Bedford gave me was an atmosphere where I could boost my confidence and see I can achieve what others thought I never could. I actually had a dream several years ago where I was back in my 4th grade math class, and with the teacher, Miss Kathy, who had utterly no faith in me whatsoever. And in the dream, she was walking through the hallways, through the rows of the desks, and she was checking her homework. And I stood up in front of the class, and I held my notebook over my head, and I was like, "Look, Miss Kathy, I can do algebra now." And she had this look of horror on her face, like she couldn't believe it, like I'd beaten her up or something. But what I needed then in that class was confidence. I needed someone other than my parents to believe in me, so I could see what I was capable of. I used to literally walk down the Bedford halls looking at my feet. Then one day I noticed I was looking up. I was straight over the students' heads, and that's because Bedford changed me. But just like it took me months to realize I didn't struggle the most at Bedford, it took me a while to adjust to the idea that I was ready for the world outside of it. Even though everyone is comfortable with the idea that we all have learning disabilities at Bedford and it makes us equal, I still felt I was subpar to students in public and other private schools. With my family, I decided to attend Starsmill High School, a Fayette County public school, my freshman year, and I was excited and ready to go. But I was also terrified of entering that 28-student classroom. Once again, on the first day of school, I was panicking in English class as we started to read our first assignment. I was sweating and a little shaky, but this time I paid attention to the other kids. They were struggling with the reading more than me. Eventually, kids were popcorning it left and right to me after the couple weeks of class. Me knowing and being prepared for what awaited me those first years of high school kept cropping up. First semester, my English teacher assigned To Kill a Mockingbird. I'd already read it in Miss Day's English class, as well as Julius Caesar, which was required sophomore reading. I was the only student who knew how to put a research paper together, while all the other kids were trying to figure out a topic sentence. I already had my 5-paragraph paper consisting of 3 to 11 paragraphs ready to go, not to mention a quote to start it off. And similar patterns started cropping up in my other classes. I felt more prepared for high school than any of the other kids. If you haven't noticed, I am only hitting the glory notes though. I am not going to lie, I struggled. And I still struggle to this day with such a large environment. I cried every single day coming home from freshman year. Adjusting socially was extremely hard, and I still struggle with that aspect of school life every day, often feeling as if I'm alienated from the school and that my teachers will never know and care about me as those at Bedford. But those are prices I am willing to pay for what I have achieved. When I was younger, my mom always told me stories about her and her high school newspaper staff, and eventually they grew into dreams of my own. I never recognized this as an issue when I was younger, but writing for a newspaper staff is kind of hard when you can't read and are a despicable speller. But I persevered, and as my skills improved, I got the courage to start a newspaper at Bedford. It was called Bedford 411. It only ran about 3 issues, and it never came up again. However, I was not discouraged. One of the main reasons I wanted to go to Stars Mills and not a private school was because of the opportunities it offered me outside the classroom. So the second week of freshman year, I showed up to a sophomore English teacher, Debbie Smelly, who was the newspaper supervisor, and I said, "I want to join your staff." And she said, "No, you can't. You're a freshman. Come back next year." So I did. With the confidence Bedford gave me, I stood up in front of the whole staff the first day of class, and I ran for features editor. And my slogan was, "I won't let anything sucky go in the paper." And it worked, and I got it. And the year after that, I became managing editor, and now I stand before you as the editor-in-chief of the Starsmill High School newspaper, The Prowler. It's pinpoint the individual aspects of being a reporter that Bedford gave me while I'm in the moment, but looking back, it's all clear. Because of Bedford, I had no problem walking up to a principal or a teacher or a student and asking them a question, or asking them to repeat the answer 3 or 4 times until I had the full story. When I'm writing in my reporter's notebook, I still follow Miss Westbrook's guidelines to how to take proper notes. It's a daily struggle to find the right words to summarize a whole story in 100 words, but because of Bedford's ingrained encouragement, I know I will eventually find it, even if such an epiphany comes hours away. The lessons, perseverance, and determination Bedford has taught me never fades. However, I still have my moments. Without question, I am still the worst speller ever. When the newspaper is being copy edited, without a doubt, 40% of the misspelled words are mine. One time, we didn't pay close enough attention to the headlines, and we printed a paper that said cheerleaders fly high in competition, rather than state competition, which is how it should be spelled. It also frequently occurs that the word busy, which for the longest time I spelled B-E-A-S-Y. The word frequently occasionally appears as frequency, and the word remember is always missing the second M. But now I just laugh about it because I know that those mistakes don't define who I am. These tiny failures that happen again and again no longer kill my enthusiasm. If anything, they make me stronger. About 3 weeks ago, I actually had one of those embarrassing dyslexic moments in front of my AP class. I was in AP macroeconomics, and we had this worksheet we were working on, and there was a chart with a long list of interest rates. And my teacher asked me to calculate without a calculator what the reserve requirement would be if the interest rate was 1% of $1,000. And I went blank. For the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. I just sat there looking at him, not knowing what to say. A girl across the aisle started whispering the answer in my ear, and I quickly repeated it aloud, but it was wrong. So all the other kids started snickering and laughing, and the embarrassment and overwhelming confusion of not being able to figure out that problem, which should have been a simple math problem, wanted me to break down and cry, but I didn't. I shrugged it off because I have outgrown that confining feeling of I can't and turned it into if I can't do this, there must be something I can do to equalize it out. It was my 3rd grader moment all over again, but in high school. I didn't lose faith and give up in myself. This time I knew even though I felt like a failure, I wasn't, and my enthusiasm waned for like the rest of the period, but by the time I was back the next day, I was more enthusiastic than ever to prove I was better than that stupid econ equation, and I was better than all those students who were laughing at me. I have watched myself go from failure to failure multiple times, sometimes even daily, but never with a loss of enthusiasm, but without loss of enthusiasm, and that's why I am one of Bedford's many success stories.